Okay, so hello everyone. It's Omega Zero back to do again. So this time I wanted to do something a little bit different, just because I kind of just wanted to do this. I want to make a tier list video for Fire Emblem Awakening. Now, I was like, oh Omega, why do you want to do a tier list video for Fire Emblem? I'm like, well, Fire Emblem Awakening was the first time I really got into the series, because it was originally supposed to be like, you know, the last one that we were supposed to receive. That it did super well, probably because of FE12 at the time. So we have a tier list here, courtesy of Getting Glaceon, and I'm on tierlistmaker.com, and it goes so far as S, A, B, C, D, and F. Now, when I do this, I'm probably going to do it in terms of the way that I like the characters and how I perceive them, like their support interactions and how good they are. Stuff like, you know, typical tier list stuff. But I will say that character interactions and how they're depicted will take a priority over like combat based, because you can make any character in this game good if you just grind them long enough. Because unlike in this game, other games, like beforehand, I believe you could grind freely anytime you want before the next chapter starts. So we are going to start, I believe, in the way that the characters are presented. Now, if I'm wrong on this, I'm wrong on this, yada yada yada, whatever. And you notice that some boss characters are here. They're all listed alphabetically except for Cordelia for some reason, who's at the very end. So let's start with the characters that you technically have access to first, being Robin, the main, like the original character that you can create, and Chrom. Like by default, I think like both Robins should be I want to say A tier. This is mainly due to the fact that they do have characters. I'm only putting them in a placeholder for now. This is due to that their characters are well established. They are smart, but they do kind of get away with some questionable things at times, being like, oh, their plan is flawless, everyone goes to them, so you could probably say, hey, give it off a little bit of Mary Sue, give her Stu's vibes. But the thing is, like, they also fail. Like, they fail quite early on into the story, because spoilers, like Emmerman, like, you're going to rescue her, she like sacrifices herself, so like, oh, their plan failed because things just go sideways. So they're not perfect all the time. And their availability as a character, that they have access to every class with the exception of the gender exclusive one. So I might put female Robin over male Robin because she has access to Gale Force, which is extremely broken in this game. But you could say that male Robin has access to Wrath Vantage, Vengeance, Nosferatu tanking. So I feel like that kind of evens them out. Though I do think Gale Force is better for passing it down for like some of the units like Morgan and all that. But ultimately, I still think like both of them, they could sit comfortably in A tier. I guess I explained the tiers. I didn't do that. S, amazing, 100% around. I might be biased when it comes to this. A means they're pretty good. I'm taking account of most things. B, they're all right. It's not like their character is bad or anything, but I think it's better than others. C's, like they're passable. D's, like they're lacking some areas they can be expanded upon. And F means like they're just bad. I don't like them as characters. I don't like grinding them up. Stuff like that. Okay, moving on to Chrom. I think Chrom is another character that fits a bit more comfortably into A tier when you look at his supports. And like, if I'm being honest, I want to say most of these characters will probably either go into A, B, or C. Or I think we realistically won't get someone who's S ranked just because of how broken or powerful they are. Though you could probably make a case for some of them. So Chrom as a character, I feel like he's kind of always criticized for being a bit too trusting, but he also does let his emotions get ahead of him, and it does technically cost him at times. Like, for example, when you're going to save, where is she, Maribel, in one of the earlier chapters, his actions technically cause a war between Plegia Plegia's King Gangrel and Exalt of Elise, Emmerman. Even though Emmerman strives for peace and Gangrel was potentially just forced or just being crazy to just wanted to start a war with Elise for vengeance, even though we can kind of see it. You know what? No, screw this. We're gonna break the rule quick. Gengar goes in F tier. I'll explain him in a bit. But Chrom, as a character, I feel like he does suffer for his actions. And while he does get called out quite a bit by a few of the characters, being Gangrel, Grima, and Wallheart down here, he gets called out for his beliefs and honoring that, but he kind of sticks to his code, which I feel like is typical for a video game protagonist, where he kind of sticks to his code and he questions his fate, and he emotionally does suffer, along with Lissa, when Emmerman dies, when she sacrifices herself in the cutscene. So I feel comfortable putting Chrom in A tier, and as a character, when he's used, he's a Lord, so obviously he has to be good. His magic stat isn't good, obviously, because he's not a magic user. The only way you're going to get him to use magic is if you use a DLC class for Dread Fighter. But even then, why would you do that, in my opinion? I feel like leaving him comfortably as a Great Lord at this point is perfectly fine. Gets access to Ether, Rightful King, and his other classes can give him like it's kind of like a substitution skill if you don't want to use Ether. Even though I believe that certain skills get priority over others. Like, I believe Ether gets priority over stuff like Luna, because it's a unique skill for the characters. But, moving on. Then we have characters like Frederick and Lissa. We'll start with Frederick first, because he's just personally. He's good, as a character. Like I said, I personally like most of these characters when I try and play them for the first time. Frederick, he's a good tank overall early on. He doesn't really start falling off until around the mid to late game, unless you train him up like I do. Like, I train up all the characters I like to have max stats and all that. And yes, it is a pain in the butt to try and max him out. But his character, when he first shows up, kind of diminishes points a bit. He's overly cautious, and I think it's called Frederick the Wary by both Chrom and Lissa. I believe even Emmerman kind of like jokingly calls him that, but he doesn't mind it since, well, he's their retainer. And he obviously wants to protect them. And he's obviously suspicious of a random person just lying on the ground in the middle of nowhere. So, and then he also calls into question, like, Robin. Not calls into question, but he's, like, rightfully suspicious of Robin at the time. And thus, like, I feel like his character is kind of comfortably set at B tier. Though you have to do kind of like go out of your way to, I guess, like, make him like likable. Like, you do have to raise supports where it gives him a big backstory, where it says, oh, he trained Sully, and for some reason in the not the codec, like the journal where it gives like everyone's description, he's the fondest of starting fighters. I think what kind of brings him down to B tier is that he's kind of overly obsessive of Chrom and Lissa's protection. Like, he's a... And he can kind of be kind of creepy about it. Because in Chrom's support, he wants to, like, dust out pebbles out of the way. He goes far out of his way to, like, make sure everything's fine, camp secure, everything's great. But he prioritizes Chrom the most. And when he like starts a recruiting campaign to get more people to join the Shepherds or at least his army, he puts up naked posters of Chrom, like, in everyone's tent, and Lissa, like, apparently dies of laughter. So that's kind of like the point. His personality kind of brings it down a bit, along with his gameplay, being that he kind of just drives into B. He's not C because he's not boring, and he's not D because I don't hate him like I do for Gangrel. But yeah, he does evolve off eventually, unless you change around his classes or something like that, but that requires extra resources, and those are, like, the ability to freely change between classes, you would have to, like, kind of go out of your way for some of them. Moving on to Lissa. As your early game healer for a while, she kind of sits between B and A tier for me. I would put her above Frederick because her personality is instantly more likable. And she's like a naive princess, so she's supposed to be trusting of people. But as a character, I like her most. I might actually put her in A tier. Because the way she's like... If you look into extra supplemental material, like the DLC, the free DLC from Fates, where she has the ability to meet Ophelia, her potential granddaughter, and she meets Owain, or who's going by the nickname Onin, yeah, she comfortably kind of like sits in A tier. But that's because you've taken supplemental material. if I go into the interactions that she has in game between each of the characters, she seems to be fairly nice across the board with everyone, especially Maribel, since that's her best friend. She doesn't really go against anyone particularly hard, in my opinion. Even with Vague, someone who is her brother's rival, she doesn't hate him or anything. Or self-proclaimed rival, I should say. She doesn't hate him or anything. She genuinely, like, she's okay being around him. She's friends with a good majority of shepherds and wants to be around people. Even a person like Longu, who's afraid of women, who in all his supports eventually grows to be okay around them. She questions him and doesn't belittle him. She questions his ability at first, but when he proves her wrong, he's like, okay. She doesn't hate him for that. And when the pranking of the character with Robin, I don't know female Robin, unfortunately, because I didn't play as female Robin, because I play as male Robin. So it's kind of like, she pranks him. So she has a bit of a childish side that allows her to grow. She doesn't technically grow from anything, because most of these characters, due to the way Fire Emblem support system works, they're kind of static in the way, because they can grow in one support, but kind of like revert to their original personality in another support. But as an early game healer, she works well. She has access to Gale Force. She has no access to offensive moves, but kind of like the access to just having Gale Force kind of comfortably puts her maybe as like a B+. Or like just like right below A-. It depends on how much further we go into this. Moving on, we have both Virion and Sully. Virion I like in B because his silver-tongued attitude between most of the characters kind of is funny to me. Because he's able to beat Robin like the master tactician, but he also points out in chess, but he also points out the fact that he makes a lot of like suicide tactics. He purposely lets people like quote unquote die if he was to do that. So he's better leaving Robin as like the superior tactician, even though Virion is able to defeat him in a game of wits. He's able to charm Frederick in a way where Frederick questions like, why the heck do we have Virion along? And he knows that debt collector is chasing him. And is like, oh well, I mounted so much debt, it would be a net loss for the debt collector. And Frederick respects him to an extent, but he also kind of gives him like, hey, you better not screw around with Grom or else you might be in trouble. He's like, fair enough. And he has a funny interaction with Libra here because of like Libra's depiction of, I guess, and like Fire Emblem Sting as a whole, where they have characters who do look like women at times and are voiced by women. In the case of Libra, for his English voice, I believe he was voiced by Versa as well. He gets confused and he's like questioning like everything. He's like, he has like, are you a woman? So I actually might move him up to A tier because his supports are kind of funny between each of the characters. He helps Olivia get over her shyness a little bit, which Olivia kind of grows to in every single one of her supports, which is kind of the problem. So, yeah, I'll put Virion in A tier because I like him personally, even though I don't use him all much, because his class skill set is actually kind of limited. Because I believe he's primarily limited to like mounted riders. Like he has access to Dark Knight. I'm not sure if he has access to Sorcerer, where he would get Vengeance. I'm pretty sure he doesn't. But like the fact that they don't have offensive skills, but a lot of like support skills, like hit plus 20, the rally bots, but he's not a very good rally bot because I believe he only has access to being magic and skill. He has access to Life Taker, which in itself is a defensive supportive skill because every time he gets a kill, he recovers half his health. Everyone's health, it maxes out to 80 in this game. So I feel like he's good overall. Moving on to Sully. Sully as a character I do like, but her usability in the fact that she comes equipped with like the Kane enable of the game, she comes equipped with Stall. I feel like Stall has a little bit more usability than Sully, because Sully's skills, yeah, she has access to like Luna, Aegis, and all that. She does not have access to Gale Force initially. So you would have to pair her up with, I believe, a certain group of characters. I believe Donald, and I want to say Kellum as well. Donald, Kellum, and I believe Henry might have access to like Gale Force for them. But you're going to have to like you're going to have to pair up with a specific character. Like, again, like Robin, Donald, Callum, or one of them. you have to pair him up with them in order to get Gale Force onto her child, because yes, the child units are on here. So with that, I believe like it kind of diminishes her usability as a character. Like, I'm not a master Fire Emblem character, I just like master anything. I just play like the newer titles. I play like one old title at this point. As a character, Sully is... I like her character, again. She's kind of like gruff and around the edges. She wants to be a knight. She's like the tomboy of the group, because she doesn't really particularly care about... She cares about her figure in Robin's support, where she says like, oh, she's like losing muscle and all that. And even Robin questions like, oh, I didn't know you were one to care about your figure. It's like, oh no, it's muscle. She's apparently a terrible cook, which she unfortunately passes on to her daughter right here, Kajil. And it's so bad that it's actually able to get like everyone in the entire army sick and like gasping their stomachs in pain. And you see that in her support with like, in like the father support with Kajil. It's like, yeah, I do all the cooking because she's terrible at it. But as a fighter overall and a character, I do like her personality, even though she's a rough around the edges. And even her support with, where is she, Muriel, which is something you kind of wouldn't expect, like, oh, Muriel and Sully have, like, a kind of support together, where Sully questions, like, she kind of questions her ability as a knight and as a woman, and then Muriel's like, don't worry about it, essentially. She asks her to study, and she's like, don't worry about it, you're fine, you're unique in your own way, you're good. So, that's the way I see it. So, Sully... kind of, yeah, like, the point is, like, her character's fine, I'm tolerable of it. I have seen most of her supports. I haven't seen everyone's supports, because some characters have very little supports, whereas other characters have a lot of supports. Moving on, so forth, for that. Okay, so we got over Sully, we got over Villain, so we're going to go into, I believe, the next 3 characters we have access to. Where is he? Okay, yeah, we have Stall, we have the Vake, and we have... where is she? Yeah, Muriel. Bias coming in, Muriel's S tier for me. Yes, yes. That's biased. I'll get to that later. Let's start off with Stall and Vake. Personality-wise, Stall is kind of stated to be boring. He has like a lot of general knowledge about some things. He's kind of like a jack of all trades in terms of his personality. He says it's boring in his support conversation with Muriel that she questions like, oh, what is he doing? Like, he sits perfectly on the bell curve between every single fighter that you could join. You have people who can transform the beast, transform into dragons for 3 of them, and potentially for these 2. It's like, he sits perfectly on the bell curve. So everyone, like, in terms of being the best and being the worst, Stall is averaged among all of them. So I feel like putting him in C is kind of like appropriate to like be right beside Sully. Personally, I do like Stall a little less than Sully, so only like 1 or 2 points. That's why he's kind of like comfortably sitting in C here. I don't use them all too often. Like, for most of the parent units, unless I really like their character, I don't use them all too often. And that includes for like some of the female characters, some of the male characters. I actually use the child units a lot more in combat. It's mainly due to their personality and how they act around the other characters. But, yeah, Stall, he has access to some of the same classes that Sully does. I think the only difference is that he has access to Swordmaster. No, they both do. I believe they have all the same classes. Yeah, they do. They have all the same classes, so you can train up both of them, so they are fairly the same. So yeah, I feel like they're both kind of comfortable sitting here in C tier. The Vake. Vake is kind of a hard one because he's kind of sitting between C and D. His bombastic and loud personality does not mesh well with me because I'm kind of an introvert. But that's my personality clashing with his on like a gameplay physics and like, not gameplay physics, like on personality between a real life person and a video game character where characters' traits are primarily the same throughout all of them. So for Vake, he kind of like sits between C and D. Like he has some offensive move. Like yeah, I believe he has access to lethality and soul, where soul is allowed to heal you. But he's also shown to be quite observant. As he's grown up on the streets, he kind of has to be rough and tumble. He has to be loud. He has to proclaim he's the strongest because he's grown up on the streets. So he kind of has to be that way in terms of his personality. I might actually put him like, he's like a D+ in a way, or a C-. Yeah, I think I'll be comfortable putting him in C-, because I have used him before to get, where is he? Jerome to be like one of the highest attack units in the game, because you pair him up with another high attack character and like, man, he's amazing. But that's Jerome functioning as him being like super overpowered because of his dad. But that's kind of like messed up. Like, oh, the only reason he's kind of good is because if you pair him up with a very specific unit, they become really strong and ultra powerful. Okay, so we're moving. Yeah, I felt comfortable putting Vacancy here. He has a somewhat rivalry with Crom, even though Crom doesn't really take him all that seriously. And they grow to be friends, kind of like that. And his support with the character. He's also, I guess, as mentioned, he's also kind of a pervert. Because he's like, oh, they want to speak peep on the women. Well, he wants to, but due to circumstances and male Robin being around, male Robin suffers as a result of it. And thus he gets justifiably mad at Vate because Sully's horse attacks both of them and he gets mad at it. So yeah, I feel like due to that, Vate's personality kind of puts him in C-. Muriel. Now Muriel as a character technically is very, very boring because she's a straightforward thinker and very logically. She's a straightforward thinker, explains things logically, and she doesn't particularly take interest in. She's a scientist and like kind of like almost appears terms. Like when you try to pair her up with anyone, her emotional connection to them, she explains it like when you're having like all the loving support, you explain the background and all that. She has a very scientific way of explaining her love and dedication to them. And even in conversation and reports where they like you pair her up with like say her husband or anything like that, she explains her love for them in like again a scientific way. But personally, like I don't know why, like her design, her ability to do things. I think that's just kind of like why I drawn to Muriel. Maybe it's also because I like smart women. I don't know. That's just me. So yeah, it's definitely biased. That's putting basically S tier is biased here. Like, am I biased to the character? Yeah, that's pretty much all it. I usually could put the Robins, Crom. I could put everyone in S tier, and I can explain myself. Why I like them and why everything is like that. But moving on forward, we then move on to some of the characters that I kind of don't like. I feel like, let's put this for Kellum. Let's start with Kellum. Kellum's story sucks for him. Because he is literally a character that is never noticed, despite the fact he's like one of the tallest shepherds between everyone. And the thing is, he is so unnoticeable that I believe you can miss out on recruiting him if you do not talk with him with Chrome. And everyone's like, oh snap, Kellum, I didn't know you were there. Some people believe he's a ghost when he's talking around. Robin actively tries to notice him, and he does, but he also kind of falls off at the end. And the thing is, he gets screwed over in the endings. Due to the fact that he gets so screwed over and the fact he's so unnoticeable, that his name is lost to time. It doesn't matter who you pair him up with, I believe with the exception of female Robin. His name is lost to time. I believe so. If you pair him up with female Robin, I think that's the only time his name is actually mentioned. And if you don't pair him up, he's like, oh, he goes on a journey around the world for like self-discovery, except it took several months for everyone to notice that he was gone. So I was like, oh, hey, where's he going? Oh, he left on a journey like months ago. It's like, oh, wow, that sucks for him. So he does have like quite a unique support conversation with Donald, where Donald's like, Donald just notices him around, because Donald is technically a hunter, so he would kind of like notice someone like sneaking around even unintentionally. And he has access to classes like, oh, he can be a healer, which doesn't really make sense to me, but whatever. The one that makes sense, like he could be a thief or assassin, which really makes sense to me because he's so unnoticeable that he could do that. Like, yeah, he's like, people are just kind of shocked to be around him. So unfortunately, I'm kind of putting him D tier. I don't hate him as D. I don't hate him like I do Gangrel. So that's the whole reason, like, he's in D tier. He's like unnoticeable, and I'd never use him. Like, he's the only character I legit never trained in any of my future routes. I trained him in my beginning routes, like, oh, he's a knight, he's supposed to be good. I never trained him in my future routes out of that, because he gets screwed over on who he marries. And so I just went like, you know what? Let him eventually build up his name, even if it takes forever. Yeah. So, yeah. unfortunately. Alright, moving on forward to Samia. I'll put her in B tier, but she's like a B minus. I always pair her up with Chrom unless I'm deliberately trying to make a Lucina that's very fast and very powerful. Because if you pair Chrom up with Samia, Lucina comes out, I believe, fairly balanced. She has like higher res and all that. And she does get access to layer class. She has access to Gale Force, so that automatically makes her good. She has access to Luna. She has access to Pavis, or Pavis, whatever you want to call it. So if you're willing to play the time, she can become good. But due to her base stat growth as like a Pegasus Knight, it kind of makes it difficult for her to excel in other classes and get very good strike boosts unless you're trying to actively go out of your way to get very good like bonuses for her. Like I believe she can become a Valkyrie and a War Cleric, so you get renewal and dual support plus. But you have to go so far out of your way to get them, and say if you're doing this without grinding, it's impossible for you to do it anyway. Because I tried doing it where I had access to only one DLC, and I would just grind this one super hard DLC over and over and over to try and max out the stats of every character. But it would just take forever. So at that point, it's like, oh, if you're just going to go off base classes, like it's ready to make her a Dark Flyer, and if you max out her level, just make her a Falcon Knight by the end of it. So, personally, she has like she's one of the few characters that actually has limited supports on who she can talk to. She can talk to Chrom, Gaius, Frederick, male Robin, and female Robin, because they can support with everyone. And Henry. So she can only marry those characters. I believe she has a support with Cordelia, and I don't know who else. Yeah, and Cynthia, her daughter. And she has a support with a few other characters I just can't remember off the top of my head. And that kind of sucks for her, because she has a very limited range of support. So, and that also kind of limits the availability of who you can pair her up with if you want them to be like that. Like, if you pair her up with Guy, it's like, oh, Cynthia gets access to, like, counter. Like, why would you want to do that? And I believe she gets access to Soul as well. But then, like, oh, just pair her up with Chrom, because Cynthia is, like, it's probably, like, the only, quote-unquote, canon pairing in the entire series that you can go with. Because, like, it's shown in the bloody intro of the game that they're together and they reveal the face of their child, which presumably would be Lucina, and then the second child, Cynthia. So, I feel like the reason I put her in, like, B tier is because, like, the lack of offensive skills, and the fact that, her support with Chrom is kind of, like, boiled down to just pies, where I believe in the Japanese version, it's way more not heartbreaking, but heartwarming, and focuses more on them characters than just pie. So unfortunately, that kind of puts her a little bit above Frederick, because of the one scene where she socks Chrom in the face, which is hilarious, I'm not gonna lie. So that raises her a few more points, unfortunately. So Frederick's kind of going lower and lower down in tiers. Alright, we moved on to Samia. Then we're gonna move on to the next character we technically recruit, being Longku. He's another A tier character in my opinion. Yes, he's edgy, and he avoids women, but he kind of has a reason to be. He doesn't really have a reason to be edgy, but he does have as a reason that one of his fatal weaknesses being that he's afraid of women, and he does this in like pretty much every single support with the exception of Olivia, but that's because he's been around her for so long. Longku crippling fear of women is as revealed in Cherche's report, due to the fact that as when he was young, he was friends with a young girl. She died, and then he eventually gets over it. But he has a crippling fear of women, mainly due to the psychological fear of what happened to his friend, and maybe him not wanting to form a bond with women, or fear for it happening again. That was just me making that crap up on the fly, by the way. But as a character, yeah, his stats are kind of weak across the board. He kind of stays he's a sword fighter, so you want him to hit fast and dodge fast. So he's there purely to strike and do hard. He can do a bit better in like an alternative class such as Dread Fighter, but again, that's DLC. It's not expensive, but he can become ultimately better. I feel like the best class for him is Sword Master, because the General Void, the Killing Edge, he gets access to technically a unique weapon, not a unique weapon, but like a weapon that's unique to Sword Masters later on in the game, and one if you're lucky, because they believe they give all the things. I believe you get access to Soul Kadia, another DLC weapon, which is Myrmidon class only, because it's Lynn's weapon, so you can use him. I personally like Longku very much, More so than Varian, because yeah, while he's edgy, he kind of has funny supports. Like, especially like with a character like Noe, where he's like, oh, I'm not really afraid of Noe, but that's because she is like a young child and that's already questionable things. But he eventually kind of like grows pretty much in every support. His fear is primarily just real women, so he doesn't hate them, but due to his fear, so on and so forth. We're going to move on to our first prologue character, that being Donald. Donald's a character who I have trained up in the past, but due to him being like, you have to actively go out of your way to level him up to get him as a character in that chapter. It's not difficult, but due to the fact that he's a villager starting out, his classes and stats are very weak, so you have to like surround an archer and just beat him to death with a stick with Donald if you want to level up and give him access to it. His starting class as a villager ultimately does not matter, because yeah, they had to reclass into anything. Not anything, like he could reclass into mercenary or a fighter like Vake. But then he only has access to a few offensive skills, and like, his character is fine. I don't hate his character, but due to I have to like actively go out of my way to try and constantly get him and grind him. Like, I get him, I put him in my box kind of like as a reward unit in a way. Like, oh, I have access to him, I maxed him out, alright, he's good, I'm not going to pair him up with anyone. Because, like, oh, like, by the time you get to the end of the game, or around the mid-game where you start pairing up units to, like, to get the future children, like, some characters like Henry who come in super late, you're going to have to pair them up with other characters that kind of, like, suit their needs, or if you want to create a certain build because of how much effort and time you want to put in. But yeah. While Donald's aptitude skill allows him to get, I believe, 10% or 20% growth in all his stats, with luck, I believe, being his highest. It does work out for a while, and you can pass that skill on to his children. I believe he does have access to Gale Force for the female units, because he cannot obviously he can't pass down fighter to any of like the female characters, like children, like Male Morgan, I believe Severa has access to it already, but stuff like that kind of limits him in a way, in my opinion. Moving on next, we have access to, then, let's see, where is he? Rickon, and then Maribel. Well, personally, I do like these characters. I like Maribel, technically. I like Maribel more than Rickon, because Rickon as a character I do not like all that much. Because in the games, like, don't look down on me, I'm not a child. And he eventually does grow out of it, as stated in some of the supports when he's with his future children. Like, yeah, he grows out of it, but when he's more mature. At this game, I believe Rickon's like one of the youngest characters you can quote-unquote recruit, because I believe he's like, I don't know to give him official age, but I want to say he's like 16. Like when you join the army. Because like, don't look at me, he's like, he wants to grow taller and all that, yada yada yada. His supports, I do like him, but he takes like a lot of effort for him to become good. Because again, like, I stress this, like, offensive skills like Vengeance, Life Taker. I believe he gets access to Luna. I believe Counter too. Like, if you want to get some of those other skills though, you have to train him to be a physical unit. And since he's a magical unit, that's just not worth the time and effort. So unfortunately, yeah, that puts him in D tier. He's not a bad character, because I personally do like him more than Kellum and Donald. I think I put Kellum like near the bottom. Like, I feel like Kellum's like right on the cusp of F because of his usefulness to me. But Maribel is a character, another character who's best friends with Alyssa, is fond of Crom. I believe she has support conversations with Olivia as well, where she's trying to get her to change her personality in a sense to become more vocal, not vocal and loud, but to become more open. So she is someone who cares, but her personality initially when she comes off is rude and snobbish, because she is a noble, and while she says, oh, I don't intend to look on down to you, that can be something that can kind of like take people off eventually. Like, she kind of looks down on Vade, she somewhat looks down on Robin when they first meet, because being a commoner, he's being around Lissa, her friend. So that's kind of obvious, but they do grow. She becomes a better person. I believe she wants to be a judge, so she can judge people fairly and equally and not on the basis of their status. She has a reasonable hate of Gaius at first. Because, like, oh, Gaius got her father arrested, but like, oh, due to information that he leaked later, her father was released on all charges. So she can be prickly and around the edges for certain characters. But she can eventually grow on you, but you do have to like grind out those supports for her personality to kind of shine through. Because again, she's just like another character who's not a main character, like Frederick, Lissa, Crom, Robin, someone who doesn't get a lot of dialogue. She also doesn't have access to any offensive skills, so you're gonna have to purposely go out of your way to try and grind her up. But she pretty much has the same access to classes as Alyssa does, where she has the ability. You can make her a full-on support tank. I believe you could get rally speed, rally speed, movement, she can make a good rally bot, and she does have access to Gale Force, which, honestly, should put her above Sully and Stall because, hey, Gale Force, and you pass out to their male children. I'm like, oh, Brady, even though he's a healer, is like, oh yeah, he's kind of good because he has access to that skill. But overall, yeah, her to get into all those classes to try and like maneuver her way to become a better character overall kind of like stops her doing it. We are taking a long time on this. I may like to stop going on characters, or I might have to go quickly on them now, because we're approaching like over half an hour at this point. Okay, we have Maribel. I really want to start going in. Now I remember, we have Gregor, and we have Noe. Now I put Noe above Gregor because the fact that she's a Manakee, she can turn into a dragon, makes her usability and longevity a bit longer than Gregor. Even though I like Gregor's personality more, he kind of becomes a bit one note with some of his support, but he is definitely like a wise old dad or uncle that you would kind of listen to for stories, because he's able to outskill Longku, and apparently he's on par for Basilio for being Khan when you first meet him. But the only reason he's a mercenary, and he does save Noe, but he does get confused for like a bandit or someone trying to capture her. So that kind of brings his points down a little bit, even though I find his character enjoyable. He's also kind of strange, because in his support with Robin, he like notices that some things that Robin he's like, oh, you know something's wrong with Robin, so you can probably say, oh, he's very observant and wise. And like, I don't use Gregor personally all that much. He is like a wise old grandpa or uncle, because I believe out of almost every single character, he is like the second or third oldest, or second oldest, I believe, if you take into account characters that you get throughout the story. Because I believe he's second only to Noe, who is 1,000 years old, despite the fact she looks like she's 12 years old. That probably should put her in C-tier, but because she's a dragon, her personality, because she's a dragon, that kind of puts her up, and you can buy her the Dragon Stones later on, and Dragon Stone Pluses, which ultimately make her viability longer useful. She doesn't have any offensive skills again, but her bulk and defensive skills you can get on her, like Life Taker, and Swordbreaker, so you can stop Worm Slayers, can ultimately make her very useful in the long term. A lot more than Gregor when they're introduced in the same chapter. Personality wise, she's 1,000 years old. She acts very childish most of the time, but she is wise in a sense, because when she's talking with her daughter Na's like, oh, all you do is play around and goof off all day. It's like, you're not taking into account like how you should be more useful to the army. No, we say sounds like, yeah, my job is to fight. I listen to orders that Robin and Kron give out, and my form of training, being playtime, is actually good for her in comparison to Na's training, who uses the Dragon Stone to train, and it always wears her out every time she uses it. Whereas Noe just kind of playing around having fun is enough training for Na. I was like, okay, maybe you're smarter than you look, but you're not smartest. And Na is obviously as a character, go after your way, even though like we'll talk about when we get to Na as a character. Moving on to Libra and Tharja. I feel both comfortable putting them both in B tier, because they join the same chapter. Libra joins as the War Monk. His interaction with Varian is hilarious. And Crom, when you recruit him, saying like, oh yes, a woman of the cloth. So like, oh, I'm actually a man of the cloth. And like, yeah, it's lucky he's like, you didn't. He's like, oh, this is awkward. It's like, it could have gone much awkward, much more awkward. So I'm assuming like men have hit on Libra is the thing, because Varian's one, and we can assume by his interaction with Crom that Libra has been hit on by other men. And he's like, oh, they tried to sleep with him. It's like, oh, I'm a dude. It's like, oh, that became very, very awkward. As a war monk, he has very balanced classes. He's not bad or anything. I like his supports, his dark past, which you learn by pairing him up with Tharja, where I believe his parents abandoned him because they didn't want him, which kind of sucks, and he becomes a man of Naga, or that their version's world of God, even though she says, don't worship me as a god. He enjoys. Tharja as a character is quote-unquote a bad character in the sense that she's not a good person. She, like, routinely stalks both Robins, because Tharja don't care. Maybe it's because of the mark of Grima on them, and that they're literally bred to be a vessel for their world Satan, if you want to go like that route. But Tharja as a character, she does technically like grow and evolve a little bit. Like, say if you have a daughter with like Libra, she's like, oh yeah, the future version of Tharja, experimenter and all that, but you also said don't do hexing. And current Tharja's like, oh, why not? And like Nora's like, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm used to it. Tharja's like, nah, she cared for you. And even though she experimented on you, she ultimately does like kind of like care for you as a person, even though it's like very like little. And if you go into DLC, she obviously cares for Noir much more in the DLC, because she's actively saving her, and like maybe those paternal instincts kicked in. It's like, no one's gonna. You could put it like the Miss Weasley, they not hand on my daughter, you be. It could be something along those lines. So personally, yeah, I do like Tharja a lot, but due to like the way that she's written as like a quote unquote bad person, kind of brings her down to A. I would put her B tier, along with a lot of others. So we move on. We have Tharja, Libra. I believe our next recruited character is another Paralock character, Anna. Anna's gonna have to put in to C, because her personality is pretty much one note. It's money, 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 and how I can make more money. She does technically have a like conscience. She like won't do obviously bad things for money. Like, I'm pretty sure she won't go out, kill, maim, and murder for the sake of money. But like her personality, it supports even with characters like Tiki, who she kind of like abuses. She abuses like Tiki's position as the voice of Naga. In fact, she's like 3,000 years old to make more money on autographs. But she does get her comeuppance in the end. And her interaction with Robin, where Robin's like, oh, money can't buy anything. Like, oh, money, she says money can't buy anything, even love. And I'm like, Robin, like, it's not even true love is the thing, but she kind of does like that. Even in her, I believe in her, like, support confession quote, she's like, I believe, like, it's almost as good as gold. Almost. Maybe she's just lying about the fact, maybe she genuinely does care, I don't know, but the fact that she kind of, her personality is like focused on money. Like, I feel like anyone who marries her is kind of like sipping out for her, in a way. Not in a negative way, but kind of in a way. Moving on to our next character, Olivia. Another C-tier character in my opinion. Her ability, actually, you know what? No. Due to her ability as being like your only dancer, and the fact that most games only give you one, her usability immediately shoots up above most of the characters. Because yeah, she dances for units. Even though typically when I use her, I don't keep her as a dancer. I really don't keep Olivia as a dancer. I immediately transfer her to like other classes so she could get her skills. Because I see her more, I can see her offensive potential a heck of a lot more than I can her supporter potential. Yeah, in recent years I'm like, oh yeah, dancing's pretty good. Maybe I should have more of it. But personally, I also like, if I have her as a dancer and I dance for someone, it's not like I go dance, switch into someone who could defend themselves. Whereas Olivia as a dancer, she's like so frail and her void is really bad. In my opinion, every time I single used her. So I had to switch her to have Gale Force, Astra, and all that. So that way she becomes a better offensive role and can actually tank and avoid stuff better than she can as a dancer. Since I'm doing a current playthrough, I'm playing through my game, I might keep her as a dancer and just like, alright, let's see what I can do with her. I just have to keep her out of harm's way a heck of a lot more now that I'm more experienced. As a character, I feel like she's good. I actually do pair up with Varian in recent years when I play the game, because Varian as a character, his like natural kind of like charm kind of breaks down Olivia's defenses in a way, and she's kind of comfortable around him. And she's also comfortable around Longku, but they also been around each other for years at this point, so they're kind of like brother and sister in a way. At least that's the way I see it. She becomes like, you're trying that old technique Basilio used, and it's like, yeah, I'll get it right. And he eventually does, and you can support them if you want to. I just kind of see them as brother and sister, so that's why I kind of like, get them up to A, leave it at that, pair them up. But overall, I think her character is good overall, even though the shyness of the character does get annoying because of the support system, the way that it works, where they may progress all the way in one character, but they'll revert back to another their personality when they talk to any of like the other characters. But that's just like my personal opinion. I guess we'll move on to the cons, being Basilio, who I'll have him in A tier, and Flavia I'll have in S tier again because of bias. Basilio's personality, even though it's very similar to Vake, it's like if you mix Vake and Gregor's personality and you get Basilio. You get someone who's loud, bombastic, and very, very strong, but who definitely has the wisdom and intelligence that befits that of a ruler. He's kind of easy to be around. And it sucks because he only gets 3 supports throughout the entirety of the game, and most of the time I believe you can only get one of them. Like, no, he has male Robin, female Robin. I don't think he even supports with Flavia. No, he does, I believe, with Flavia. You just can't get an S support with them, which kind of makes sense, but also doesn't. Like, running low on storage space. That's right, because I'm running. So I'm gonna have to cut back in a bit, so I'll be right back to come back and do all this. Jeez.